Welcome to the HerStory Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Getrude Matshe, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Getrude Matshe here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hello. Thank you so much, Gertrude. I feel honored to be included in your circle. My name is Amanda Edwards, and I am a lifelong Southern California resident in the United States. I grew up in the Foothill community just north of Los Angeles, and think of myself as a pretty average American girl next door. I had a really comfortable and safe upbringing in a suburban community outside of Los Angeles. I come from a very close-knit family. The foundation that I had is sort of a very common story of an all-American girl growing up, as a child in the 80s. We had a very, as I talk about, a very material-focused existence. And here I was, this young child who had a really strong sense of spiritual content in the world. I was really tuned into nature, loved animals, grew up as a very sensitive child, and was really somehow inexplicably connected to the invisible, kind of subtle, quiet content in all of the interactions that I had with the world. So it was this strange experience of, being part of a family and a community where I had piano lessons and played soccer with my friends, football to most of the world. But really always felt this quiet voice. The book I wrote is called Quiet Voice, Awesome Power. And it's really goes to that point of all the way through the thread of my life, feeling this sense of quiet, a quiet voice always being there as a presence and guide to me. At some points in my childhood, I actually would hear whispers that were clearly not part of my own thought process. It was like I could hear the presence around me of spirit, whether it was actual people, I wasn't sure. I remember asking my family about it and being sort of dismissed. It just was not part of the cultural tradition that I came from. So my story has very much been a process of figuring out what this spiritual content was that felt so compelling to me, so much a part of my everyday life, and yet it seemed no one else was really talking about it or acknowledging it in the world that I came from. I did grow up in a pretty traditional, faith-based, supportive community, in a Protestant church community. I was very lucky to be in the Los Angeles area that is so diverse and really includes many cultural backgrounds, people from all over the world. And the faith community that I grew up in was very open-minded, progressive, not dogmatic. So I was able to make some connections between my sense of nature and the spirit in all of the universe around me and some of the messages that I was hearing, going with my family to church on Sundays. there were things that were so formative about that for me growing up, like singing together. The community experience of choral music was something that I found really stirring. Making music myself at the piano felt like a spiritual experience for me. And so all of this was kind of quietly going on as I grew up and went to school and tried to, measure my success the way people around me were measuring success. Like, what kind of degree were you getting? What kind of career were you pursuing? Um, another really important young experience for me was being diagnosed with an autoimmune illness. So that really brought my focus into my physical well-being and attention to my body, and suddenly being on all these different medications that sort of affected my ability to engage with life in the way that I had when I was a little kid. So as I grew up and felt sort of other than the people in my peer group who were applying to law schools and planning these lucrative careers, I felt this sort of odd stirring that there was something else, something very different and kind of outside of that norm for me. And I was on this journey that I kind of kept having to go forward and discovering what that really meant without exactly having mentorship to lead me to answers about it. So a couple of the really important, I now would look at them as divine intervention points. I think our lives, because the divine is absolutely part of the fabric of everything that happens within us and through us in our lives, those points of divine intervention are often presented as conflict points or obstacles where we really have to change the path that we're on in order to discover what we're really made of, what we're really here for in our lives. And so some of those conflict points for me include that, experience with the autoimmune illness, and then also some, average kind of familial conflict dealing with alcoholism, substance abuse in the family, having my young early marriage fall apart when I was raising my 3 little kids whom I'd adored, and just feeling really outside of where I belonged. Even though I knew motherhood was for me, I knew taking care of and being a nurturing part of a family was for me, I felt entirely out of place in the life that I was living. So as one of my former therapists talks about, my life exploded in a number of ways. Physically, I was not doing well. Emotionally, I was not doing well. I ended up leaving that marriage of 12 years, and it was one of the most difficult and probably bravest things that I did on my path. And from there, it's like my life cracked open. I started to be drawn to people and experiences that just lined up so much better with what I felt like my soul was wanting to learn and know about life. It felt like a more precarious place to be living, less security, less certainty about where I was going. Um, but all during this time, my spiritual gifts started to sort of come to life, to blossom. And I realized that those quiet voices and my attunement to the spiritual content in our world was, everything was waking up. And I started to have more intense experiences of voices that were not my own, didn't belong to me, having this ability that led me sort of oddly to visit a spirit medium one day. And thank goodness I took my best friend with me for the experience, because this was totally outside of anything I had done before. And in that session with a spirit medium, it's like a whole new view of the world and myself was opened up. And that's what started the path for me to become a spiritual coach and psychic medium, offering other people that access to spiritual content themselves. And that's what I wrote my book about, the way that all of us have access to that spiritual content, and some of the ways that our lives and this human apparatus that we dwell in offer us that natural access that so many of us are separated from or confused about in our lives. So that is sort of the summary of the story of how I ended up writing a book. A lot of the parts of the journey are sort of darker and more challenging and difficult, but when I look at them in the rearview mirror now, they all feel like gifts that have led me to this place.
Amanda, what an incredible journey you've been on. The interesting thing, though, is you tuned into your gifts at a very, very early age. And although you didn't know what it was there in a very strong part of who you were and a very strong presence. And now you're really unraveling that gift and sharing it with the world, which is fascinating. And I can't wait to delve more into your personal journey and find out why being this weird kid who was quiet and spiritually with this ability. So, how did that experience influence your approach to spirituality and connecting with others?
I think a really important part of the experience for me was that going over the hurdle or breaching the wall that I had sort of built around keeping things secret. I think a lot of us hold a certain self inside that we don't share with the rest of the world. And being a really sensitive kid and really, kind of vigilant about other people and what they thought and how they were responding to me and each other, I think I was especially reserved as a kid and needed to have that experience of vulnerability that I think is one of the ways we all end up connecting with our true selves, our soul and our spirit. That if we're never willing to get to that vulnerable place where we can come up close to other souls and come up close to sort of this universal spirit that we're all part of, that we just don't get there. When people keep those walls up, it's, I think, one of the biggest disconnects that keeps us from really thriving. So for me, it took a lot of these experiences that sort of forced my hand. It forced me to put myself out there, forced me to take a leap, feeling just so distinctly in the wrong place for a while in my life, where I was really suffering mentally and emotionally and trying to hold it in. And eventually you burst. Sort of the dam has to burst when you're holding back so much of yourself. So I think in a way, life will do that to us. Even when we try to hide what we're going through, things will happen that just make it impossible to hold back.
So, what inspired you to finally write Quiet Voice, Awesome Power? And what messages do you hope your readers will take away from it?
Well, I think I probably have been working on this book, at least in my head and my heart, for at least 10 or more years. And actually, interestingly, in that session many years ago with the medium that I referred to, just on a lark, I thought, I've got to go see this woman and see what she has to say about what I've been going through. One of the messages she gave me during that session was she could see a vision of me being an author someday. And at that time, I hadn't really, put it all together. I had a kind of a different career path in nonprofits, in the social justice sphere. And that just stirred something in me that stuck with me for a long time. So as I was going through this kind of spiritual breakthrough and awakening and taking classes and learning how to tune into my intuitive self, it just kept feeling like I wanted to write it down and I wanted to share with other people what I was learning, because it wasn't strictly for the purpose of doing psychic readings for other people. Everything that I was learning was making my own life better, my own connections to other people better. My sense of peace and equanimity in all of the tough things that I was going through was just hugely benefited from tuning into spirit. So as I noticed that and then worked with clients over many years, I saw similar improvements in their lives coming from that spiritual connection. So I thought this is just something that needs to be shared right now. I also feel strongly, I want to mention, right, in the times that we're living in, I can really see so many patterns that are calling for women in particular to tune into their spiritual gifts and step forward as leaders from that place. We have, we were talking earlier about things like natural disasters that people are suffering from. In the last year, I've watched with so much pain over the ways that wars and horrible, violent, genocidal campaigns are taking place across the world, and these extreme, painful times that our humanity is going through.
Yes.
And the sort of the patriarchal systems, the white supremacist systems that have gotten us here, it's all interconnected, all of that suffering that's happening. So I can really see in the ability of women, or at least feminine energy in particular, to open up to a new way of thinking that's more community-based, more caretaking, more focused in on the nurturing of spirit and the nurturing of the earth, each other, that is going to be so central to getting us past this painful time that we're living. So it's another inspiration for me to try to help others connect to that part of themselves, because we need a lot of us to be doing that right now.
Yeah, there's a big need for a injection of feminine energy in everything we're doing in the world right now. That nurturing piece is definitely missing. Now, you describe spirit as a significant part of all life around us. How can someone who is new to spirituality begin to recognize and connect with this presence in their daily life?
That is always sort of a fun challenge for me, especially when I work with people who have a really literal way of looking at life, or, a lot of us, I think one of the benefits of coming from this pretty materialistic society that I grew up in is that being immersed in it, I know the challenge of trying to connect with nature, for example. A lot of people are living in very concrete lives, and knowing the experience of connecting with spirit requires quieting down a lot of the noise of our industrial lives. So that's the first step. And one of the tips I give people isn't always literally making yourself quiet, like in a meditative state. Sometimes vigorous exercise, or dance, or something that really engages your body in the whole system that helps you tune into spirit is an even quicker direct line to that spiritual experience. So in my book, I try to give a whole range of examples and exercises and ways that I have found can kind of unlock that gate to spirit. So it's anything from, like I mentioned, connecting through music. Our connection to nature, of course, is a direct line to spirit, because it reminds us of what we're part of universally. But back to that quiet voice title of the book, there's a quietness and a subtlety to the way spirit communicates. So I try to give people a whole array of examples and access points that for them, they will find a meaningful way and a meaningful language with spirit that is their own.
Now, the book includes practical exercises to connect with spirit. Can you share one simple exercise that listeners can try today?
Sure. Well, a lot of the time, no matter what the exercise is, I have people focus in on their breath. And a really simple, quick way, no matter where you are, no matter what your circumstances are, is to focus in on your breathing, because we're doing it all the time anyway. So to really give yourself at least maybe 4 or 5 cycles of very deep inhalation, of course, but to focus even more on the exhalation. I usually emphasize that with the people that I work with, to really let your exhalation stretch as far as you can possibly push it. And there's something about that little moment of pause before you take breath in again that is that subtle kind of emptiness that lets you fill back up with spiritual content. I don't know how to describe it any better, but when you can focus in on that sort of deep point of exhalation and let yourself just be in that moment before the breath comes back in, it's that subtle feeling, that sensation of being kind of open to the world before breathing in again, that it's almost like a rebirth moment. It's like when a baby is born and they take their first big gasp of breath. That's the experience of life rushing in that I want people to connect with in feeling and access to spirit. So doing that out under a tree is probably the best place to begin, because our plant and animal family that we're part of in this world, it's like they're conspiring and collaborating with us and wanting us to feel that connection. So that's just kind of a little intro way for people to start thinking about it.
So, how does engaging the mind, body, spirit ecosystem help us heal from loss or past trauma?
Well, when I talked about my own sense of peace and equanimity that came from opening up to this part of myself and this access to universal divine nature that's part of all of us. I think it sort of is it's a byproduct. The healing is a byproduct of that relationship. So when we know more closely and intimately our own divine nature, it makes things like loss and separation feel very different. So if it's a loss of a loved one, for example, that's something that I work with people most commonly on who come to me for sessions. Feeling the ability to know that person's presence, regardless of their physical presence, is just, it just is a naturally healing sensation. It helps calm us. It helps restore kind of confidence in life's expansiveness. And it's just a powerful moment, especially because people come to me as strangers, and the fact that I'm able to connect with such specific nuance and intimate detail of that person's essence and their personality and the importance for the listener. It's a really astounding and kind of eye-opening, awakening experience for the listener to have. So I love being part of that. It fills me with awe every time I get to do it myself, because I just am open and let it come. And I would say that that's how it works, is the healing just comes from that very naturally.
So many people struggle with trusting their intuition. What advice do you have for cultivating trust in our spiritual guidance?
That's a really important question. I think one of the things that it takes these days, because our society we're a part of a great big world, and there are so many different ways that people approach this topic depending on your cultural background. But at least I know where I come from, there are many ways that our culture squashes down our natural intuitive abilities. There's something good about skepticism, but something really destructive about this just blanket dismissal of spirit and kind of divine presence in life. So the first step, I think, is to be able to develop your own questioning ability, to question the very messages and people and places that have influenced you during your life. I ask people to start with kind of a spiritual autobiography of sorts, where they look at where their beliefs came from. Did it come from a church? Did it come from a teacher, from a family that, said you need to believe these certain things? And to question, do you still actually believe those things based on your experience? And that sort of inventory of beliefs is a good place for people to start questioning and rethinking whether they're letting their own intuitive wisdom guide them or listening to outside voices more.
How does physical movement or body awareness play a role in revealing and impacting spiritual messages?
I love this one because it's sort of a accidental discovery, I think, on my own journey. I felt really compelled during the years that I was living this sort of pretending life where everything looked shiny and polished on the outside, but inside I felt, total turmoil emotionally about where I was in my life and what I was doing. I felt really anxious a lot of the time. And it was sort of inexplicable anxiety, but that feeling in your gut, like you just are carrying anxiety in your body. And one of the ways I discovered to help alleviate that was to go running. And I hadn't really been much of a runner before. I'd been an athlete as a kid, but long distance running was not something that interested me, and it felt hard. I didn't like huffing and puffing, but during this time, I just felt compelled to go out and run. And it was such a beautiful way to calm that nervous system reaction that I was having in this anxious sort of tied up way. And then the more I did it, I found these really like clean pathways of thought and imagination were opened up. And the longer I ran, I would come back feeling more hopeful, more positive, more sort of, I had better vision about my life, what it could be beyond the place where I felt really stuck. And I noticed it was always just really with great reliability connected to those runs. So I started to look at how people use dance and exercise and how yoga is, such a great spiritual practice. That it just made sense that our bodies are very involved in this endeavor of connecting to our spirit. So really that's how I learned that it was connected. And that's one of the reasons I have people connect with their breath, because that's such an essential, fundamental way to recognize your body is involved with it.
Yes.
So I don't like to, prescribe that it has to be running that gets people there, but whatever the way is that you can engage your body in something kind of vigorous and active, I just am positive that it works.
Yeah, it's interesting because I find that when I go on long walks is when I space out. I say the term I use, I space out. I get out of my head.
Yes.
And I can really tune in when I'm walking, but I can't meditate sitting down. So
Right.
walking meditation is something else.
It's wonderful. I talk about meditation and in motion all the time. You could be washing dishes at the sink or watering your plants outside, but something where you're engaged in an activity, it sort of unlocks a part of you that lets in that content.
So what are some of the common misconceptions about spiritual channeling, and how does your book address them?
Well, I hope I address them. As soon as you finish a book, you think about 10 other chapters you'd like to add to that one. I don't know if you've experienced that, but we put as much into it as we can when that publishing deadline is there. I'm always thinking about this because people ask me questions that I haven't thought of, before. And I find that one of the things I think maybe people don't understand is how the very subtle, quiet information is something to pay attention to, that it's not always this, the way you might see a medium or a psychic in the movies. It's not this dramatic arrival of a ghost in the room, rattling the furniture, that kind of thing. Certainly,
Yes.
I think people do have experiences like that. That's not how it works for me, but being willing to just receive this subtle information and speak it out loud is a very powerful act. So as soon as I started speaking out loud and practicing to do these readings for people, I discovered, oh, there was so much more information right behind that. It's like I had to open up the gate, and as soon as I started talking, more and more would come.
Right.
So the way I think of it is there's this constant steady stream of spirit presence. It's not like we have our loved ones are, watching us from the corner of the room to see how we're living our lives all the time, but their presence is constant as a stream of, wisdom and attention and care. That is affirmed for me every time I do a session with a new client.
Mm. My last two questions are a bit of a thought experiment, a time experiment. And in the first, I'm going to teleport you back into the past. And we are going to go and have a conversation with the younger you, a young woman who was on the cusp of discovering her spirituality, really trying to figure it all out. In case there's a beginner who's listening to this podcast right now, if you could go back and give yourself 3 nuggets of wisdom based on what life has taught you up until this point, what would those 3 nuggets of wisdom be?
I love this question so much. The first one that just popped into my mind is don't be afraid. I think as a teenager and in my early 20s, I was just afraid. And now it's hard to even quite grasp what I was afraid of. But taking risk, putting myself out there, going against the grain, all of those things felt so kind of dangerous for some reason at the time. And now I would say, do not waste a minute worrying about being like anyone else. Don't even waste a lot of time worrying about your sort of material well-being and safety, because I have found that every new step I've taken, the path kind of appears as I'm in motion. I've always said this prayer in my darkest moments. I will just pray for the next stepping stone to light up in my life, just one stepping stone. I don't need to see how the whole journey is going to work out, but if that next stone will light up, and without fail, after that prayer, something comes up. I get an email or some solution comes my way. So maybe that's 2 answers in one. Not to be afraid, and to just be willing to take one step at a time. And then I think the third one, especially for young women, the world needs you. The world needs your specific femininity. It needs your connection to your own masculine energy. We all have some combination of those energies that need full engagement, and to be able to find what parts of yourself you're letting be tamped down or quieted, focus on letting those come to life, letting them come out so that the rest of the world can see them. And that's the part that feels scary to a lot of people, but it is so worth it. And the world so needs you to do that.
Absolutely wonderful. Last question, I'm teleporting you into the future.
Okay.
And we are going to go and sit and have a conversation with a 90-year-old you.
Oh.
With science and technology, you'll probably live until you're 120, but we'll stop at 90. And we're going to go and talk to this wise woman who has led you up until that point. What will you say to her when you finally meet her?
I have found myself thinking about this quite a bit. Age is a funny thing. I reached a milestone birthday recently, and I thought these numbers just don't mean anything to me anymore, because you still think of yourself as the kid inside. I hope that 90-year-old, 100-year-old Amanda will still feel like the kid inside that I do right now. I don't think that ever needs to change, and I hope that that's true for her. I also feel like the main thing I would express is so much gratitude for the bravery and the endurance that living a life that long requires of all of us, no matter what, our lives look like from the outside, how easy or difficult they may be. Life presents a lot of challenging heartbreak, loss, fear, struggle, and really beautiful moments. So I will thank her for going through all of it and trying to stay totally immersed in each experience, as the gift that it is.
Fantastic. Amanda, thank you so much for coming online today and sharing your wisdom with us. It's absolutely inspiring to see somebody who's really tuned in to the spiritual side of themselves. That last question I always ask women, because a lot of times we look outside of ourselves for solutions. We forget to go within and to listen to that little quiet voice that says, say yes, say no, go left, go right. We forget to trust it. So thank you for reminding us all today.
Oh, I've enjoyed your questions so much. Thank you. You're doing wonderful work, and I'm very pleased to know you. Thank you.
It's an absolute honor. My job is just to amplify the voices of the women who say yes to this podcast. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in today. The HerStory Circle is not just a podcast. We are a social impact movement that brings you the stories and voices of women from all over the world. We share our stories to uplift you, to inspire you, to energize you, to empower you so you can take the next step, like Amanda said, from where you are now to where you're trying to go. The steps do light up when you take that first step. So I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody, when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thanks again, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the HerStory Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Getrude Matshe, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the HerStory Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story.